Okay, I guess I'm supposed to start. I'm just going to close this door 1 second. Okay. Okay, thanks for coming, those of you who I can see. And just this International Moon Day. Can you hear me? If you well, that's how yeah, all right, good. Thanks for that thumbs up. All right, should be fine. This International Moon Day was started a couple of years ago by the United Nations. They were asked by the Moon Village Association to declare the 20th of July as International Moon Day every year. And the General Assembly at the end of 2021 declared that every year the 20th will be International Moon Day. And I think, as you probably know, it's sort of an International Moon Week. But no, I had never heard of this either till about a month ago. So it's all this stuff about the moon this week from all over the world. I think this program just ended from Ukraine. And last year, the main program was in Alabama. And this year, the main program on Thursday will be from South Korea. All right, so they've given me an hour, and if you feel like leaving, whenever you feel like it, that's fine. I'll read and I'll say things for about a half an hour. And if you have any questions, put them in that chat, if you can get to it, and I'll try to see what the questions are and answer them as honestly as I feel like. I like questions. All right, so I'll just mention that over the 9 years I worked on this book, I spoke to various experts in rocket science and art and physics and all sorts of sciencey things. And I'll read some of the sciencey bits, but I won't go too deeply because the book is fiction, and I will mainly read from these fictional parts, but I'll be doing both. And I guess, yes, you can always stick a question in the chat at any time, and I'll probably see it later. I think maybe most of you know who I am, but I'll just say it because this is going out on YouTube also, so maybe other people will see it. So my name is Jeff Probst. I'm American, but I've lived in London since 1990 with my South African wife, Roz, who some of you will know. And as far as this story goes, it takes place in the 60s, the 1960s, in this fictional town in America called Goodmuse, that's known for its very bright moon. And for about 10 minutes now, I'll say a few things and read a couple things to set the scene. I'll just read this 2-page opening chapter first from the book. Goodmuse, South Dakota, Chapter 1, Early Spring, 1965. Francine had always doubted it could happen, that a person visiting a place for the first time could be so taken by it, they would decide to return. But on her first Goodmuse evening, gazing up at the moon as she stood alone on the salmon pink pavement, bathed in the front garden's white-flowered fragrance, she said to herself, "Yes, the moon is the moon. Goodmuse is no brighter than any other. But is there something in the way it hangs above the orange woods, the way it reflects off the Mars-colored cliffs? And I thought my heart belonged to Arizona." Even though she'd been drawn to Goodmuse by the TV program about its moon, she found that the town beguiled her too. After a few disoriented walks past rows of houses along bendy streets, she got used to seeing windows and chimney stacks directly ahead. and she found herself warming to the Good Muse accent, which at first seemed disconcertingly harsh for such a gentle-feeling place. As she listened carefully, the discordant twang became less bitter and began to dissolve into something like a dark chocolate that was coating a softness inside. And she liked the way that people said "Good Muse," with the stress falling lightly on good. She often ended up on Good Muse Way, stopping outside the scaffolded church, which reminded her of the pictures she'd seen of Gaudi's Basilica in Barcelona. It struck her as Good Muse's own bandaged creature, but beneath its time-worn boards and blackened bricks, she could sense its balanced beauty. So Francine, she soon discovers these other moony aspects of this moony town. And I'll read this little bit on moonflowers first. Should be easy to find. Maybe I don't see it. All right, it's fine. So anyway, she soon discovers these various other moony aspects. And there's also a book in the Good Muse library that talks about the history of the town. And I'll just read a couple of bits from the book about Good Muse that's in the Good Muse library. Good Muse's beginnings. There has been a settlement here since at least the 1700s. Beyond that, nothing can be proven. However, there are many accounts that have been passed down concerning the village's founding by a local Indian tribe, said to have been drawn to the area by the brightness of the moon. Although no records have ever been found, it is also believed that moon viewing evenings were an important feature of these early days and were held on the night of the full moon, both to bring people together and for a night of oaths, to be sworn by the holding of a stick with feathers to the moon. It's also believed that moon calls were developed to announce the rising of the full moon, and that moonflower petals from the fragrant white night blooming flower that we still see around town were scattered on the ground to sleep on. And then the other bit, our moon dial. Early this century, also on full moon nights, there was moon dial viewing. Some will have seen the concrete moon dial, now mossy with green, in the cemetery. Moon dials tell time using the light of the moon, in the same way sundials work by the light of the sun. Sundials, however, are far more precise. Moon dials are only accurate once a month. It's hard to picture, but this is explained by the fact that the moon rises about 50 minutes later each night, making the moon dial read an additional 50 minutes slower each night, following the accurate reading on the full moon. This would also mean that the dial will be 50 minutes fast on the night before a full moon. Thus, our moon dial served little purpose beyond being a gathering point, 1 week either side of a full moon. And then the book talks about, there's a bit of a poem that's almost worn away on the bottom of this moon dial, and it's a couple of lines from Percy Bysshe Shelley. And he wrote, "Art thou pale for weariness of climbing heaven and gazing on the earth?" And there's one other poem that people seem to find when they're walking around town. This one is posted on the clock tower near the train station. And it's written by this American child prodigy from earlier last century And one of the verses is, when the moon comes over Brooklyn, on time with the borough clock, 'tis the same that saw Palmyra and the walls of Antioch. So the plot, it begins to develop when this schemer, this outsider named Samuel Thwaite, he decides to take advantage of the town's reputation for its bright moon. He calls a town meeting and persuades people to let him set up the world's first moon center. He says it'll bring good news into the spirit of the space age. And one of the town's oddballs at the meeting has too much wine and he starts singing, "When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, it's a good muse." I'm going to summarize the build-up to the plot now for maybe, I don't know, it's about 9 or 10 minutes. Francine, who we first saw entering Good Muse, is studying astrogeology, and her particular field of interest is the moon. She's also a color scientist, and she becomes the Moon Center geologist. Samuel Thwaite holds a contest for people to suggest new names for 10 roads to show a connection to the moon, to go with his moon center. And the names selected by the people of Good Muse's suggestions are Copernicus Broadway, Crescent Crescent, Galileo Court, Impact Street, Meteor Avenue, leading to Meteorite Close, Moon Parade, New Moon Road, Tidal Lane, Waning Gardens, and Waxy Way. And then this Mr. Thwaite begins to put up these occasional space bulletins for the little town. And it talks about things that are happening on the moon now, which is 1966 in the book, and things like the first soft landings on the moon, he mentions, and also the first photo of the Earth that was taken from the moon in 1966. So Francine decides to become involved with something she can call her own. And she continues to work at the Moon Center, and she moves into that scaffolded church, and she remakes it as the Moon Church. There's nothing religious about it. She puts up moon maps and information about eclipses and moon bows. I've never seen a moon bow myself, but apparently there are nighttime rainbows. I'm sure some of you have seen some. And apparently when you look at it, it looks black and white, but if you take a photo, it's in color. And she uses her color science knowledge to create colors in a back room in the church. And she gets the church repainted along with some other buildings in town. But the biggest change that occurs at the Moon Center is that NASA hears about it, and they take it under their wing, so to speak. And at Thwaite's prompting, they designate Good Muse as the world's first moon town. After a while, they get tired of all of Thwaite's ideas to expand the Moon Center. And they see it as him just trying to do these things for his own self-aggrandizement. And they really don't want to hear from him anymore. And they tell him they're going to stop funding the Moon Center. And it makes him very angry. And he decides that he wants to upstage NASA before the end of the decade. And I'm sure everybody knows that that's what President Kennedy promised, that a human will get to the moon by the end of the decade. So if Thwaite wants to do something that will look as spectacular in a night telescope as the rings of Saturn or Neptune's blueness, but he wants to do something that everybody can see just with the naked eye from Earth. And his idea is to somehow send a color up to the moon. All right, and now for some of the sciencey bit. I hope it's enough to make some sense, but not too boring. So Thwaite, angered with NASA and wants to make a name for himself, he contacts a rogue NASA engineer, Kennington Varnon, who is an outspoken critic of NASA. And this Mr. Varnon feels they don't listen to him and his colleagues very well. And he'd love to get involved with something as extraordinary as getting paint on the moon, but it's impractical. And he explains that to get paint up there, it would be too heavy to send paint up there. There'd be no way to spread it once you got it up there. And also any paint would crack. The moon, it goes from about minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit to hotter than boiling water. So Thwaite accepts that, for he knows that that can't be done. So he tries to find out about lasers, and if he could project an image onto the moon with a laser. But Varnon also confirms that that's also too impractical. The lunar surface has something called a low albedo, which means it's not very reflective. And the amount of energy required to get an image up there that people could see would be a tremendously large amount. It would have enough power to slice an incoming missile in half. And he says it will be decades or much, much longer before a laser could ever project an image onto the moon that could be seen with the naked eye. But then the idea of compressing and drying paint comes to the discussion that Varnon and Thwaite are having. And Varnon can see that it is some theoretical possibility that using dried and compressed paint, maybe paint could be sent up to the moon. And the thing is that Varnon, he has this top level 4 special sensitive NASA clearance. And he's one of the engineers that's detailed to work on this rocket called Surveyor 4, this unmanned rocket, which were part of NASA's program to practice soft landings before they sent a man to the moon. So Varnon realizes that not only compressing and making this paint into some sort of chalky dust would make it extremely light, but in his position, he could probably smuggle it on board this Surveyor rocket. And for him, he thinks that the target area would be Mare Imbrium, like M-A-R-E, which is it's a second largest crater on the moon, I think, and I think the 5th largest in the solar system. And the thing about it is that it's pretty flat, and it would make a good canvas for paint. So I'll just read some of, he happens to have read one of Francine's fact sheets that she's written recently in the book that's July 1967. And she explains on her fact sheet what Mare Imbrium is. Mare Imbrium is a dark plain on the moon, easily visible to the naked eye from Earth. If the moon were a clock face, from the Earth's northern hemisphere, Imbrium would be the roughly circular patch at 11 o'clock. To those who see the man in the moon, it's his right eye. Dark patches like Imbrium were once thought to be vast oceans. Mare Imbrium, named by the 17th century Italian astronomer Giovanni Riccioli, means Sea of Rains. Although we cannot be sure until lunar soil samples are brought back to Earth, it is now believed that Imbrium's dark appearance is due to the lava that covers it. Mare Imbrium itself is a vast 3-mile deep crater surrounded by 3 rings of mountains, thousands of feet high, some of the loftiest on the moon. By May 1967, 99% of the moon had been mapped. At around 700 miles in diameter, Imbrium is large enough to hold Great Britain and France. Mare Imbrium is dotted with smaller craters, but Surveyor 3 confirmed its smoothness. It's very smooth for the moon. All right. And even more sciencey, this little bit here. Varnon, this NASA engineer, he's also NASA's advisor on helium-3, which some of you in the audience will have heard about. Helium-3 is a rare element, and more specifically, it's an isotope. But on Earth, it's extremely rare, but it's been used to boost nuclear weapons. But on the moon, where it's been embedded by solar wind forever, it's embedded very shallowly in the regolith, which is the upper surface of the moon. And maybe there may well be 1 million tons of it up there. And scientists are generally agreed that a reaction involving even a small amount of helium-3 in the regolith would produce a massive explosion. So Varnon comes up with this plan. He wants to combine this dried paint, when he gets it, with lithium, which is light and a good conductor of heat and has a low melting point, and it's flammable. He's also devised a way to get the paint to Mare Imbrium once this Surveyor rocket has landed on the moon. And he feels that once this paint gets to Imbrium, it'll be, the way he has set it up, it will be ejected near the center of the crater, mixed with the helium-3, and spread out for at least the 150 miles that it would take for people on Earth to be able to see it. But the missing link for him is the paint. He needs to powder it and dry it, and to see if his compound will combine with it. He's created this compound. He's been experimenting in his lab with, he doesn't have any helium-3 to work with, and there's no moon rocks that's come back from the moon yet. So he does the best he can with the materials he has. And with this lithium, combined with what he can approximate of the moon's regolith, he names this compound he's made regolithium. And he's able to engineer some mini explosions in the lab. So he needs the paint, and he asks Thwaite to ask Francine, the geologist and color scientist, to create this paint. And Thwaite knows that painting the moon is the last thing that Francine would ever want her colors to be used for. So he tells her just to create this a color for the Moon Center's 2nd anniversary, which he's scheduled for July 17th, 1967, which is the same day that Surveyor 4 will land on the moon. And he wants this paint to have what Varnon tells him, to have this earthy natural quality. and a glow that seems to come from within. And Francine can't picture at all what that would be like, nor can she ever even picture what a first anniversary was like. She doesn't think there even ever was one. But she sets about trying to create a color that White will be happy with. So I'm just going to have a sip of water, and then we'll have this creation of the color and the end of the book. Maybe we just have a break for 5 minutes at the most. I'll just leave everything on, if that's all right. Is that all right? And I'll come back within 5 minutes. Okay, thanks. Lorraine, has that been about 5 minutes, do you think? I know you can't talk. Hold up fingers. Yes or no? All right. Jonathan, has that been long enough, do you think? Okay. All right, thanks. I see the rest of you too. There comes Steve. All right, good. And I realize at the end, you don't have to do chats. I think I can unmute you so you can talk like human beings, most of you. All right. So I haven't read too much, so I'm going to read, maybe it's for about 8 minutes or so, of Francine creating this color that is destined for the moon. When Thwaite had gone, she went back into her room, the old parlor pew she'd made her own, with her bed and dressing table, an easy chair and blue carpet, and some dried flowers in a vase. What would a natural looking color look like? Francine wondered to herself. A rock? And what would a color look like that seemed to glow from within? Those prismatic ones that sparkle from chandeliers? Maybe, but paint doesn't do that. And there was no such thing as a truly new color like Thwaite wanted. Picasso may have come up with his own cherry blue recently, and Rothko his outdigo, his opposite of indigo. And there would be others. Chemists had been inventing synthetic pigments for 5,000 years, ever since the first one, blue frit, or Egyptian blue. But weren't they all simply different shades of what humans can perceive? Color had an infinite spectrum, and no color could be beyond that unless the genetics of the eye were to change. She recalled seeing pictures of the 1933 Chicago exhibition, lit up by floodlights that had been switched on by the starlight from Arcturus, starlight that had passed through a telescope to focus on a few electric cells, which then turned on the lights for the opening ceremony. She nor Sam, that's Thwaite, would have the expertise for anything like that. But she'd give his color her best shot. No one had done more for good muse than he had. No one had done more for her. She went to the back room and opened the door to the sudden sharp scent of her work. Paint and oil. Her color wheel, yellow at the top these days, before it moved into green at 2 o'clock and blue at 4, hung on the wall along with torn sheets of paper streaked in experimental color. Near the window, 2 pieces of polished amber sat on a shelf, amongst a row of thimble-sized blocks of colored resin. On the window's middle rail sat her prism, balanced like a skinny monolith, a skinny skyscraper. She looked down at the floor and saw stripes of prismatic color that had caught the late morning light, the day's first bright sighting, always delighting and surprising her. And she knew she'd be able to get fresh glimpses of the color throughout the day as it traveled around the room in its sun-guided journey. Sometimes she'd even twist the prism in its position, so its gleam would rest on her arm for a while she worked. Then she puts on the Beatles' Good Day Sunshine for some inspiration. From the first line, the song shone, glowed, seemingly almost from within. Its effortless fluffiness making her feel like running outside in the afternoon. Was it possible to make a color that sang? Colors in nature made people smile. How did that work? She was looking at her color wheel as the song ended. Her paint tubes were arrayed on the table in front of her, her beakers and pestle and mortar in place, her brushes in tins, her oils in jars. The room was still. The cockeyed optimist song from South Pacific came into her head, and its line about the sky being a bright canary yellow. I'm an optimist, she thought, but I'm not an alchemist. You can't transmute a tube of paint into a color that doesn't already exist. So she plays around with more of her colors, and a thought struck her. She had avoided working with brown as a base. As color theory put it, it had a limitation of scintillation. It was the one color with no endless depth. But theoretically, she also realized, a lustrous brown, if it existed, would be on the bronze spectrum. It would appear to glow, and it would appear gold to the eye. Colors had their lustrous extremes, she knew. Silver, for one, was lustrous white. But a golden glow coming from brown, a lustrous brown, it didn't make sense. Brown was the color of figs, of Tootsie Rolls. And if a lustrous brown could be created, someone would have done it by now. Joshua Reynolds, hadn't he made lustrous brown from asphaltum, Jew's pitch, bitumen from the bottom of the Dead Sea? And what about the pre-Raphaelites' mummy brown, made from ground-up Egyptian mummies? She'd seen a bronzy glow in autumnal nature up near that pond. There had been a gray pre-dusk backdrop above a thin strip of blue, and the foliage and the clusters of maples had been ablaze with golden bronzes flagrantly lit by the sinking sun. Could she try for that bronziness? So she experiments with more colors, and she gets some sparkle in the paint. And she mixes orange tree bark and sap and bits of shiny mica to try to make this paint sparkle even more. And this is the last bit of her trying to create this paint. She drizzled the woody shavings into the bowl. She stirred the gloop, now a twinkling golden red, and placed a white enamel dish on top of the bowl. To keep the paint moist, she'd leave it overnight to see if it made any difference, and left the room, closing the door. And in the morning, she goes to this back room again. Sunlight shone through the window, some falling on the mortar bowl and the dish on the top of it. Would the paint still have that sparkling amber beauty? She wanted a color imbued with light, like the sea glowing at sunset. She stood before the bowl and gripped the side of the plate on top, closed her eyes and slid the plate off, lowering it onto the table. She stuck a finger into the bowl and stirred blindly, then trailed her coated finger along the table. She opened her eyes. It was radiant, the color of amber, yet grainy, like the pink of the grit on the paths of the park. And it sparkled from its depths, like stardust. She could almost see through it, yet it looked endless. It was flecked orange, flecked red. It gleamed like a full moon, just risen. It was Good Muse gold. All right, about 4 minutes more, it looks like. Yeah, however long that was. So she gives a tin of this Good Muse gold to Thwaite, her boss, and he gives it to Varnon at NASA. And soon Varnon informs Thwaite of the following. I've created a paint that should be able to withstand the moon's extreme temperatures. For all intents and purposes, the paint will be permanent. Erosion on the moon is extremely slow, about 1 centimeter every 20 million years. There's no atmosphere. Paint in a vacuum doesn't deteriorate. And on the moon, it would be like storing it in an airtight container, as airless as the most complete man-made vacuum on Earth. He then explains to Thwaite what should happen once the paint reaches the surface of Mare Imbrium and reacts with the moon's helium-3. The mixture should catch alight. It will begin to burn slowly just below the surface. In my mind, if you were on the moon, you'd see it building to a fiery ball of gas, feeding on itself, getting larger and larger. It might look something like the inside of the sun. But whatever this superheated gas ball looks like, it will build up until it bursts like a giant firework. Remember, the paint, and now the regolith, will be imbued with lithium. Lithium is a pyrotechnic. Its salts cause flames to burn brightly. In fact, we think certain orange stars contain a high concentration of it. What should then happen is that this blazing mixture will spread like lava until it runs up against Imbrium's surrounding mountains. Then it will stop, and this gray crater will be left coated in our transfigured Good Muse gold. He also explains to Thwaite that we won't be able to see the moon being painted from Earth, even though the gas ball will be incredibly bright. At the same time it's spreading, Imbrium will be in shadow from the Earth's vantage point. There's no way getting around that, he says, but it doesn't matter. He tells Thwaite that he will fax a statement to various radio stations and wire services when the color gets to the moon to describe what people will be seeing. And this is the last little bit that I'll read. It's 2 paragraphs from this statement of his about what's going to happen, what people will see, and any more would be a spoiler. And just by the way, as some of you may know, the new moon, like in reality, was last night and pretty much still today. And we can't see it from Earth because it's too close to the sun. It's rising with the sun, setting with the sun, and we can't see it with the naked eye. So I'll just read these last 2 paragraphs from what I'm reading. In 2 weeks, soon after next month's new moon becomes visible, something never before seen in human history will begin to appear. A glowing, golden, painted moon desert that will be visible with the naked eye from Earth. This exceptional sight will become part of our new night sky. Every month, everyone on Earth will be able to watch a golden moon waxing and waning before their eyes. Each night for 2 weeks, the color will expand little by little until the moon is full. Then as the lit part of the moon decreases each successive night, so will the gold. When the Moon Center was founded 2 years ago, few people outside the space program could have envisioned what was about to be realized in space exploration. Many incredible events have happened in the last 2 years, including the first spacewalk and last year, the first soft landing of an unmanned spacecraft on the moon. But until now, there has never been man-made color on the moon. I will stop, and I think I can probably unmute you if I can figure this out. I don't know. Can you you can't unmute yourselves, I don't think. I think I have to. Glafke, are you there? The woman controlling.
Yes, I believe they should be able to unmute themselves.
Can you unmute them, Glafke?
No, they should unmute themselves.
Oh, apparently you should be able to unmute yourselves. I'm getting head shakes here.
Let me see.
All right. Glafke is in Cyprus doing all this. I can see the faces of those people who haven't gotten rid of their picture.
Say quickly on the chat line.
Oh,
Oh, I'm unmuted.
okay. There are people.
Okay, we're all unmuted now.
Wonderful.
Unmuted, yeah.
I think Roz is still muted, and she's on two places. All right.
Sorry.
All right. Well, that's great. Just, I don't know how long is Louise. Hello, everybody. Glafke, how long is left? Do you know?
10 minutes.
10, 15 minutes.
Okay, thanks. If anybody wants to say anything or ask anything, you can. If not, good night.
Oh. Yeah, good night.
Well,
Just
thank you,
raise your hand or something, or just start, do whatever you want.
Thank you for that. It's very nice, very interesting.
Thanks, Chris. Chris is a neighbor. He
Yeah.
knows everything. All right, go ahead, Chris.
No, that's all. I just said thank you for doing it. It's kind of nice to hear you read bits from it. And
Jeff?
have an explanation.
Thanks.
Well, I'm glad you didn't do a spoiler, Jeff. That's me, Lorraine.
Where are you? All right.
Because I
thanks.
haven't finished. Here I am. Yeah,
All right,
but
Jeff,
Yeah.
can I comment?
thanks. Yes, Andy. Andy's
Absolutely terrific, Jeff. Thank you very much. I've read the book, as you know, you and I have discussed it, but I got a lot more out of that reading, and I'm so impressed by the sort of detail, the knowledge. I mean, you must have put done a vast amount of research to get all this stuff sorted out. I mean, that's just the stuff about the colours, the technical stuff is just incredible. You mentioned that she put some tree bark in. Had she used the bark or something from the tree that was central to the book? Was it the orange tree?
yeah. There's an orange wood grove
Orange wood.
in this book, which is like redwoods, but they're orange woods. Like they're just called orange woods. So she gets some of this orange bark and sort of puts it into this mixture to get an orangish barky color.
And that's what does the trick to make it.
Well, yeah, maybe I guess
It helped.
It helped.
No, because the orange wood is central to the book, isn't it? It occurs often. People go to the orange woods. There are these gypsies or something, aren't there? There are hippies in the orange woods.
Hippies. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Somebody else goes there, doesn't it? One of the characters goes there to escape at the
He
end.
does. He
They're
does.
quite important in the book.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, Andy. Let me see if anybody else has any comments. Steve is all the way in America. That's wonderful, Steve. All right.
so Jeff,
Yes, Lorraine.
all this, I haven't finished reading the book, but so far, like all the stats you quote, are they accurate? I mean, can I take them as accurate?
I hope so. I think so.
Okay.
I checked
Okay.
them. And, the book is fiction, but
Yes.
I spoke to these people who know these things, and I
Okay.
believe the facts are correct.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, Vicky. Can I say?
Any other comments or questions? Yes, Stephanie, my sister. I'm sure you'll say something positive. No, go ahead, Stephanie.
Well, I should hope so.
I was realizing that I was focusing on the book and I was on the story and what would happen. And with your talk, I got much more focused on the science and it's so interesting and I'm so impressed.
All right, thanks. I guess because it's International Moon Week, I decided I'd concentrate on the science.
But it's fascinating to hear. And I also am reminded of how books on tape, I mean, not on tape, audiobooks,
Audio.
you hear them, there's something extra special. And I loved your reading. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, there are wonderful readers who I've heard that their mellifluousness makes you want to listen more.
Well, I think your reading I really enjoyed it.
All right, thanks. Thanks.
Hey, Jeff.
Who is that?
Jeff, it's Kathy. How are you?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I'm fine. Kathy's also in America.
You don't get a picture because I just had cataract surgery and I look way too bionic today.
All right.
I did that before.
Can you talk a bit louder, Kathy?
Oh, I said that you don't get a picture because I just had cataract surgery
All right.
and I look way too bionic. But
Yeah,
I
you're not,
really enjoyed what I heard, Jeff.
thanks. You're not the only one in the audience who just had cataract surgery.
Ah, okay.
Not him. Jeff, are
Yes.
we audible now?
You are very audible, Jonathan.
Sorry, we had difficulty unmuting ourselves or being unmuted even after a lot of other guys are. So is it in order to say something brief?
Yeah, of course. Say anything in the world you want to say.
Well, as someone else who have read the book, I can understand why you carefully chose your selection of readings and your story not to make spoilers. But I'd just like to add, having read the book, that just to hear your readings and the things you say, someone might deduce that it was a novel mainly for sort of technically fascinated people. And my feeling was that although that was fascinating aspect, it very much wasn't just that. It was more than that. I would say it's a novel about the dynamics of that there's quite a lot of action in it and things are happen and people are, it's a novel about how the people and the protagonists are driven to do the things they do by their reactions to one another's very different characters, and that those characters are interestingly related. They're each of them a sort of thumbnail sketch of various kinds of people that are in the world and run, you know, plays different roles in making the world go round or not, as the case may be. And I have to say that for me, that was the most fascinating part of it. And that would, of course, be really much more difficult to bring over in a set of readings like that than the aspect that you actually accentuated. So I think it's just worth saying that, you know, it's a novel with that dimension in as well.
Thanks very much. Yeah, yes, this was focusing on that particular aspect. Yeah, thanks.
Jeff, may I say something?
Yes, Michael, who are you?
My name is Michael O'Callaghan.
Michael, I do know you. You got a beard. All right.
I just really enjoyed your reading, and I think that was such an interesting way of approaching introducing a novel to tell us so much about what's in it. I find quite often when people tell me about a work of fiction, I just can't tell if it's good or bad. From what you've presented to us, obviously good. And you've inspired me to get my telescope working and get it out.
Okay. Great, Michael. Thank you. Thanks very much. By the way, Michael is the convener of this long-running Proust group in London, and Andy was one of the main members of it. So Michael's read too much, but he keeps reading anyway.
Jeff, can I have another go?
Yeah, you can. Just let me make sure. Does anybody else want to say something before Andy's another go?
I want to say something.
Okay, Anka.
I was a teacher of physics for a long time, and teaching the solar system and about moon and about stars is one of the favorite subjects of the children below 15. After 15, they kind of lose in the interest in those things and start interested more in the chasm. But I think this kind of literature, for those who are reading, is quite capable of provoking that kind of interest again, and wanting children to learn a little bit more about this, because adventures, even that sort, is quite inspiring. So I'm really glad that you wrote this book, and I will definitely recommend it to my former pupils who likes to read these sort of things.
All right, thanks, Anka. Yeah, I wonder how the wordplay will do with younger people, but if you look at the book and think that they can call it, that'd be wonderful.
Well, I really hope so, because we do need more reading people in the world.
Thanks. And just anybody else before Andy? All right, maybe this is the last comment, then we probably will have to go, I suppose. All right, Andy?
Yeah, just a quick one, Jeff. I think you've got a tremendous level of appreciation today, very well deserved. how are you getting on with appreciation in the wider world? How are sales going?
It's a minnow in a vast ocean. So, I'm just doing what I can because I loved writing it, and I probably love it too much, but I'm trying to do readings and things like that, and just have to see what happens over the course of the next year or so, really.
Keep going, Jeff. You deserve success.
All right, thanks. All right, then, if there's nothing else, should we say goodbye?
I
Thank
now.
you.
Okay,
All right,
I
thanks.
enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Terrific.
Thank you very much. I hope to see you in the next meeting.
Yes, thank you. All right, goodbye, everybody. Thanks very much
Bye.
for appearing, beard or not.